Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links video. Today what we thought we'd do is, as a follow-up to us predicting what we thought was going to be in the next box, we're going to predict what we think the next structure deck and bundles are going to be. Just kind of a fun little exercise of using our future knowledge to predict what we think might be happening, why we think they might be happening like that, and using the way that Konami have done things in the past to try and predict what they're going to do in the future. So let's start with something a little bit spicy. I think that Konami is going to want to put maximums into a structure deck. And why do I think this? I think it will be a brand new mechanic, which will be very fun. Therefore, I think they'll try and jump on that hype and try and get people to spend real money on it. And I think the best way to try and do that is by having it in a structure deck. But I think that the player base would cry out if they put one of the very, very popular or very, very strong maximums in. So I am predicting that we will get Supreme Skystream Magnum Overlord. So this becomes Yuga's kind of third maximum, I believe, from the anime, because he does start out with the Machine Magnum Overlord, and then he gets the Vast Vulcan, and I believe he does end with Supreme Skystream Magnum Overlord. So this card is a bit funky. So for a start, it does have the Magnum Overlord traditional 3500 maximum attack, which is okay. So while this card is in maximum mode, we can send this face-up card from your field to the graveyard to special summon up to 2 monsters from your hand face up to your field, then destroy a spell trap on the opponent's field. So this already probably is ringing some alarm bells for people. Why would you summon out a maximum monster that's very difficult to get out and effectively becomes your big boss monster just to sacrifice it and then pop a spell trap and summon out some extra monsters? That's because Skystream Magnum Overlord is basically like a supportive maximum. It's never really done a ton on its own. It usually supports other kinds of strategies, which is why it's always been kind of the black sheep of the maximum monsters. It's not fantastic. It does have its uses, for sure, but it's never been like the, oh, I summon out this max, I've now won the game card, and that always leaves it feeling a little bit underwhelming. If we look at its other effects, so while in maximum mode, you can shuffle 1 monster from your graveyard into the deck, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the level of 1 monster in your graveyard times 100. Then if you inflicted damage to your opponent by this effect, you can add that monster to your hand. So basically, we can take a monster from our graveyard, put it back in our hand, which does work quite well with the middle piece, which special summons cards from the hand, and then we can burn our opponent as well, which works towards the theme, right? And then the last piece, the R piece, while in maximum mode, we can send the top 2 cards of the deck to the graveyard, which again can be seen as fishing to get cards to put back into your hand. This card loses 1000 attack, so immediately it will drop down to 2500 attack until the end of the turn. This turn, this card cannot attack directly. It can attack all of your opponent's monsters once each. Also, it inflicts piercing damage. So we put it down to 2500, but again can attack all 3 of your opponent's monsters and inflict piercing. Now, if your opponent has as much as 0 defense monsters, that's fantastic. We're just about to hit them for 7500 damage, which is one of the reasons I am not 100% this would come out anytime soon, but I think this could have a chance to come out in the future when we do have access to a few more cards that can stop yourself from just being OTK'd by this card, because again, being down to 6000 life points does give this card a bit of a boost, especially considering it does have burn effect. But I think overall, this would make sense to be in a structure, and the reason I say that is all of the structure decks we've had so far have been Yuga themed. So the very first one we got was the Volt Condor, which is a Yuga boss monster. Then we got Rider Cross, which is a Yuga boss monster. Then we got Ace Breaker, which is a Yuga boss monster. And then we got the Dark Sword Magician / Spellcasters, which is not technically a Yuga boss monster, but it is Yuga adjacent, right? Yuga is the spellcaster guy, and it was a spellcaster set. So I think following in that tradition, Supreme Skystream Magnum Overlord could be an option to come out in a structure deck. So following the theme of Yuga, let's talk a little bit about Lightning Volt Condor. So this card came out in the very first structure deck and was underwhelming. Basically, Volt Condor is a deck that does okay if your opponent plays everything in attack mode and if you have access to more than the 5 cards. If you're able to get to 6, 7, 8 cards, you can actually competently kill your opponent in 1 turn. But how often do you get to do that? Not very. Lightning Volt Condor, however, did get some more modern support relatively recently. I want to say it was about 4 or 5 months ago, we did get some new Lightning Volt Condor cards. Now, one of these cards in particular I think is a little bit too strong, and that is Lightning Volt E. I don't expect this card to come out anytime soon. This card is basically, it can special summon itself if we have a Lightning Bolt Condor, and it can attack twice if we have a Lightning Bolt Condor, which it's Dragius on steroids, effectively, depending on how you think of it. So I don't think this card will be coming out anytime soon, but a card I think could come out is the Lightning Bolt Kite. This is a card that hasn't really seen a ton of play because it's a little bit underwhelming, especially compared to Volt Eagle. So we already did predict that this card might come out in the box, but if this card doesn't come out in a main box, I could actually see this potentially coming out in some sort of Volt Condor deck 2, which I don't know how likely that is, but it would be really cool to see. But this card, we already spoke about it in the last video, but if we have a face-up level 7 light attribute wing beast type monster on the field, we can special summon this card from our hand face up to our field. So 2300, special summoned out. I think that's probably fine considering we already have Dark Sword Magician. If we have 10 or more cards in our deck, and we have Lightning Bolt Condor face up on our field, we can draw one card. So drawing a card is basically what Lightning Bolt Condor really wants to do. It's another high level monster, which again does support the Lightning Bolt Condor strategy. I think if we did get Lightning Bolt Kite, we potentially could actually see Bolt Condor being a powerful boss monster, and this would be a really good way to try and force that to be. So the next card that we'll talk about for the Volt Condor deck would be Spark Voltaic. I think this card also might be a little bit too good, but maybe. But we can shuffle one light attribute monster from our graveyard into the deck. This turn, this face-up card can be treated as 2 tributes to the tribute summon of a light attribute wing beast type monster in attack position. Then you can add Volt Condor from your graveyard to your hand. So this one card basically gets a Volt Condor from the graveyard and special summons it out. I mean, not really, but basically, right? We summon Volt Egg, shuffle some cards back, then put Volt Condor back into our hand, then we tribute Volt Egg for Volt Condor, and then if we have, let's say, a Volt Eagle, we could then special summon that out. And it's very good support for the archetype. I think this card might do a little bit too much to support the Volt Condor strategy, so maybe not this card. The last Volt Condor card I want to talk about is Flash Volt Check, which is quite simply send one light attribute wing beast type monster from your hand to the graveyard, draw one card. Then if you send a level 7 monster to the graveyard in its requirement, you can send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. So it's basically discard, draw a card, a little bit of filtering, and it can also mill some cards, which does work quite nicely into how the Lightning Bolt Condor, at least the modern version of the deck, wants to play. So I think this would probably be fine. I don't think this card would be broken or anything. I think this could support the deck quite well. So the next structure deck I predict could possibly be Star Knights. Now we already have some of these cards already. We have Nessus the Star Knight, and we do already have a Keklis the Star Knight, but some of these other Star Knights actually have effects, and actually some of them are okay. So if we just talk about them one by one. Pelion the Star Knight, we can send the top card of our deck to the graveyard. This turn, increase the levels of one face-up monster on your field and one face-up monster on your opponent's field by 2. They gain 500 attack. So this is a 2500 attack monster that can basically gain 500 and put itself up to 3000, or you could boost a different monster's attack. This is probably one of the better cards, but it doesn't seem too busted. It's just a very strong card. The major takeaway from this card is it actually have 2000 defense, which is very, very high for having such a good effect, as well as having quite good attack. Next up, as Bolus the Star Knight, we can change one attack position, level 5 or higher fiend type monster on your field to face up defense position. One face up monster on either side of the field gains 600 attack until the end of this turn. So again, this card does revolve around boosting attack value. And again, we can boost itself up to 3000, which can be a very relevant number. 2400 attack base is also pretty good. Next up, Cheron the Star Knight. If your opponent has a monster on their field, send the top card of your deck to the graveyard. Choose one face-up level 5 or higher fiend monster on your field. If it attacks defense position monster, inflict piercing damage. So this, I think, would be a good card to release. I don't know if it would actually see much play. And that is just because, although it does give piercing, it's on a level 7 body, and it's only got 2300 attack, which isn't quite all the pieces you want in all the right places. We want to have piercing, and ideally we want monsters to be able to give them self-piercing if they are high level. Unfortunately, Cheron doesn't have the attack power to really support that in such a good way, which is why it's a little bit lackluster, which is why, again, I think it would be completely fine to come out. And finally, Folos the Star Knight is a level 5 monster. Shuffle 3 monsters with the same type from your graveyard into the deck. Special summon one level 5 or 6 normal monster from your graveyard face up to your field. Then you can reduce the levels of all face up level 5 or higher monsters on your opponent's field by 4 until the end of this turn. Now this is a very important effect because this will allow us to use effects that only work on X or lower level monsters on higher levels. So for example, we could target a maximum monster with this and then reduce its level by 4, putting it down to level 6, which means we could then kill it with something like a Royal Rebels Heavy Metal, which only works against level 8 or lower. The other reason I think Star Knights could be a good pick is because Acebreaker, although is an anime card, the rest of the Flag Mech and Flag Beast archetype is traditionally a manga archetype, and so are the Star Knights. So in the same way they made basically a manga deck be a structure deck, I think this could also be another manga deck that could become a structure deck. So following in themes of both having Yuga decks as well as follow-up decks from previous structure decks, Ridacross. So Ridacross, Hero of the Dawn, completely garbage. The only time this card was ever really seeing any kind of play was when its fusion came out, Ridacross Ash, Hero of Chaos. But there is also another Ridacross monster that came out called Ridacross Hero of the Dusk, which could possibly come out at the same time. Its effect is a little bit lackluster, level 721, so it's, again, terrible stats. Shuffle 2 warriors and or spellcaster monster from your graveyard into the deck, special summon a level 6 warrior or spellcaster monster from your hand, face it to your field. Not the best effect still, unfortunately this is still not very good at all, but the fusion monster, however, is pretty good. Made using Ridacross and Dark Sorcerer being a 1500 vanilla that we already have access to. Send the top card of your deck to the graveyard. This card gains attack equal to the number of monsters on the field times 300. Now that's already good. Just being able to gain any kind of attack boost is always going to be really useful. It's already at 28, and this would boost it up to 31. Or we can look at all face down spell trap cards on your opponent's field and destroy one of them, which again, another really good effect. Now, a lot of fusions do have these multi-choice effects. This is quite a staple of especially the early fusion monsters in Rush Duel. I think when the fusion mechanic does come out, it would make sense to release Hero of Chaos as a structure deck. I think this would be a great way to introduce people to the fusion mechanic, and it would make sense considering players would already have to have the previous structure deck in order to use it, unless they did reprint these cards, which I assume you'd have to do if this card was released in a structure deck. So keeping on track with fusion structure decks, I actually think that Psychic could get an interesting structure with Chemical Cures. Chemical Cure is a fan favorite deck that's never really been super strong, but is a lot of fun to play. That's because the deck revolves around using red and blue medicine, gaining a ton of life points, playing a ton of cards, and it's just very fun to kind of go through the motions with it. So the fusion monster and boss monster is Chemical Cure Purple, made using Chemical Cure Red and Chemical Cure Blue, that we'll talk about in a minute. We can send it to 3 spell traps from our hand to the graveyard, draw cards equal to the number of cards sent to the graveyard to meet the requirement, then you can gain 900 life points. Now the cards that we're mostly going to be sending with this is going to be our red and blue medicines that will get into our hand using our other Chemical Cure effects. So Chemical Cure Blue, 1300 attack, level 4, send the top card of our deck to the graveyard, gain 400 life points. Then you can add any number of blue medicine from your graveyard to your hand, which is really good. Fill up our hand with ideally 3 copies of blue medicine is really good. And then Chemical Cure Red has a similar effect. If your opponent has a monster on their field, send the top card of your deck to the graveyard, gain 500 life points, and you can add any number of red medicine from your graveyard to your hand. Now, if you're able to get all of your medicines into the graveyard, effectively we can add 6 cards to our hand, and then we can use those to pay for various effects. We could send 3 of them to the graveyard to use Chemical Cure Purple effect, to then draw another 3 cards, or we can send them to the graveyard for other discard effects that we might have, or we can just activate them and gain some life points. I think this is a very simple deck, but it's still a very fun deck, and I think this would be a good fit for, again, an early fusion structure deck. Now, let's talk about some bundles. Now, as we've been seeing, most of the bundles that we've been getting are legends. I think we've only had 1 card that hasn't been a legend so far, so keeping in that tradition, I would like to see Recurring Nightmare come out as a bundle. Now, this card does directly support Dark Maximum cards because this card adds cards back to our hand. So it adds 2 Dark Attribute monsters with 0 defense from our graveyard to our hand. Guess what? All Maximums have 0 defense, so any Dark Maximum monsters will be great to have back in our hand. We want them in our hand as well and not on the field because that means we can maximum summon them. This card would be great to come out alongside Machine Magnum Overlord because then we can take back the pieces from our graveyard back to our hand and then maximum summon it out. So I think Recurring Nightmare would be a good shout to release alongside the Maximums coming out. The only negative to that is that this only works with Dark Maximum monsters, and unfortunately only one of the 3 Maximums that we have confirmed to be getting is a Dark monster, so this would only support one of those decks. But for the other decks, we still have Monster Reincarnation, which is a really good early Maximum support card anyway. Next up, Trap Hole. This was one of the earliest legend cards released in the physical Rush Duel game. When an opponent's monster normal summons a monster with 1000 or more attack, destroy that monster. It's a little bit surprised we don't have this already and we've got the widespread instead, but it does kind of make sense. I think we could see this card being released as, again, my mentality is always going to be that alongside the Maximum release, they don't want to release cards that would hurt Maximums. Trap Hole does not hurt Maximums, therefore it would be a good time to release it. And then shortly after, so the next box, probably 2 months later, we would then start to see some anti-Maximum cards released. And finally, the bundle I'm going to predict is Negate Attack. Why Negate Attack? So Negate Attack is really good because it doesn't destroy the monsters, which means Negate Attack can stop a maximum attack from connecting, which is very important. So again, I would release this in probably the set afterwards, but Negate Attack is also just generally quite good. Being able to stop all of your opponent's attacks for the turn can be very, very good and give you a swing and momentum that you need to keep your whole board around and then tribute it off to do whatever you want to do with it the following turn. And Negate Attack also does have some drawbacks in that because it's not something like a Widespread Ruin, you don't actually get rid of any of your opponent's threats, but it does have the benefit of stopping all of their attacks, as well as being able to stop a maximum attack, which can be very important. So those were just some predictions that I have of what I think would be really fun and what could possibly come to Duel Links as bundles and structure decks in the future. If you have any ideas of what you think could be coming out as a structure or a bundle, feel free to leave it down in the comments below. I would love to hear your opinions as well. I'm sure there are plenty I did cover and plenty that I haven't even thought of. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.